Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to showcase Hands of Judgment Attunement Stacking Paladin, a fun build introduced by patch 0.9 and the potential to one-shot Orbis, while also being able to farm some T4 Jurla as well. Since everyone and their mother is watching their favorite streamer reach level 25 in Diablo 4 over and over again, like it's an episode of The Twilight Zone, and I didn't want to have stomach surgery after eating the Double Down so I could be granted access to the beta, I thought I'd take the time off and treat myself to a much less sane build, but a build focused on one thing and one thing only: the biggest hit we could possibly get with one attack. And the results are staggering. Never have I ever one-tapped an Orbis with one attack, nor have I seen an Orbis be one-tapped without a bug, unintended interaction, or summon abomination or other insert minion build here. This is the first I've seen of its kind. I will mention this right now. Getting this concept set up took a little bit of investment, as I do have a very good pair of Hands of Judgment that I crafted the other day, and some decent gear in my setup. If you end up enjoying the content, I'd suggest leaving a like on the video, or subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way to show me that you want more stuff like this. Hands of Judgment is a pair of gloves that heavily incentivizes us to play without a weapon, but instead stack attunement to the moon, which gives us a bunch of different benefits. Mainly, the biggest thing we get is how we gain 3 flat fire damage per attunement, but we also gain healing effectiveness and 4% increased damage for judgment per point of attunement we have. This means every point we grab, we triple dip. But dear viewer, I lied to you. We actually quadruple dip. Highest Path consumes our mana and lets us deal more damage based on how much we consumed, which is affected by attunement, which you gain 2 flat mana per point of it. This means we have almost everything we need to make this build work. But there are some problems. Now, let's clear the room and say one thing. This build was not fun to play and level as with for the majority of its existence. I leveled this from level 70 to 90, going through empowered monoliths until I hit 280 plus corruption. Oh, and let me tell you, it was not a fun experience. This build is not meant for farming the Monolith of Fate, but it excelled at a different thing, and one thing only: boss killing. So I would probably play a different Paladin, get your blessings and gear set up to transition into this, then play it. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit annoying, but it's definitely one of those builds you can use to farm tier 4 Jurla. But why is monolith clearing annoying? Well, it's all based around how the concept of the build works. We have a 6-second rotation. We use Javelin. We want to hit the enemy with it, so we get 60% more damage with our next use of Judgment. It also throws down a banner, which gives us a lot of increased damage based on our attunement, which is the stat we are stacking. We then use Shield Bash, as that gives our next melee attack 20% base critical strike chance, raising us up to 25% base in total. This allows us to actually have base critical strike chance extra than what we normally get, as one of the flaws of the gloves is the lack of base crit caused by not having a weapon equipped. Then we press Holy Aura, which gives us some crit and some damage. Then we release the Judgment. Currently in this video, this Judgment is hitting the dummy for 6 million on average. But we have a node inside Judgment's skill tree that gives us 80% more damage versus bosses and rare enemies. The dummy does not count as either of these, which means we're technically hitting for well close to 10 million or more, as long as the boss is at high health and is of course a boss or rare enemy. This is a lot of damage, especially for a melee build in Last Epoch. All of this means is we have almost infinite damage and can almost one-shot everything in the Monolith of Fate, but we need to wait 6 seconds before we attack again. If we were playing Path of Exile or Torchlight Infinite, we would be screwed over, as that is insanely slow. But thankfully, Last Epoch is very charitable towards builds that are much slower than others, as objective rushing is a viable strategy and has been for a while now. This means we simply walk up on the boss, one tap him, and move on. One of the most important parts of this build before we move on, as I mentioned above, is the interaction with Shield Bash. Shield Bash can give our next melee attack 20% base critical strike chance, which is very, very, very important. Without this, we would have no build because we would barely have any base crit, and options like Prismatic Gaze are less than ideal. This means we need to fill out our 300% increased critical strike chance from other places. We also get 80% from Holy Aura, 50% from our chests, and a little bit in some other places. So getting to this magical number of 300% means we won't have to hit like a wet noodle, like you see sometimes in the footage when I miss. With all that being said, let's go in game and talk about the build more in depth, shall we? Alright, here we are in game with the character here. The name is Pinball Wizard. Don't ask what build that was, it was terrible. This was my backup build and it's going well. Alright, so the biggest concept that you need to understand with this build is we are on a rotation. If you are familiar with Path of Exile, you'll know that there was a kind of a slam build a long time ago. And essentially the idea was to use a piano worth of buffs to make you do a lot of damage. And this build follows that same concept. So the first buff we're going to use is Javelin. Now, when you do use Javelin, make sure that you're aiming at the enemy so that the Javelin will actually hit the target. When the Javelin hits the target, it will create a banner here and it'll also cast some smites, which will then help us armor shred the enemy, which is great. Also give us some passive healing. Then we'll use a Shield Bash, which makes the next hit we use with the melee attack, it'll do 20% base crit. Now this does say throwing or like melee attack, meaning that we need to throw our Javelin first and then our Shield Bash. Otherwise we will waste our crit on our Javelin instead. So Javelin, Shield Bash, then Holy Aura proc, damage. That easy. And then of course reversal, so that we get all of our mana back, so that we can essentially do the combo again. And that's pretty much the concept currently. That's how the rotation works. Now let's talk about the skills in depth. So I have a +4 to Judgment on my relic. You do not need this. Even a +2 would be fine. Simply take a point out of Scourgebane and then a point out of Proclamation, and you'll have very close to the same amount of damage as me. So that's fine. So we take 1 point travel into Sacred Sword, 1 point travel into Purifying Flame, 1 point travel into Warrior's Tithe, and then 1 point into Prophesized Immolation, which gives us a bunch of more damage based on our increased healing effectiveness. Now, of course, as well, we gain a bunch of healing effectiveness by, of course, being a Paladin, and also from Judgment itself, because we get it from Attunement. So you get 4% per attunement, so we get 400% healing effectiveness there. Then we get another 500% from here. So this node here is giving us about 90% more damage. It also makes it so enemies cannot dodge our attacks, which is very useful when we're trying to push corruption, as cannot be dodged is a very annoying modifier, especially for a build that really needs to frickin' hit the first time. We then take 5 points into Pious Offering, as it consumes all of our mana and gives us a bunch of more damage based on our mana. So right now we have 555. We will deal about 1,110% more damage. This is 10 times what we would have without it. So if we did not have Pious Offering, we would be hitting for 600k instead of 6 million. Yeah, Pious Offerings, very strong. 2 points travel into Divine Destruction. This allows us to one-tap almost every single boss in the game in terms of the Monolith of Fate, like the little mini bosses, as they're always going to be at high health and we're going to deal a lot more damage to them. We then take 4 points in Scourgebane for 80% more hit damage against rares and bosses, because that's mainly what we'll need it for, is for rares and bosses, and allows us to do a lot of damage. Then of course, 2 points travel into Swift Verdict, 1 point travel into Ensuing Fervor, 1 point into Ascendant Liturgy, gives us a bunch of free Fire Pen, but we do lose the Consecrated Ground, which is fine, as I'll explain later. then 5 points into Proclamation to double our damage again. So all of that combined makes our Judgment hit like an absolute truck. Then the next most important skill is Judgment. We take 3 points into Dazed, 1 point travel into Broadened Steel or Shield, 1 point travel into Flame Coating, then 4 points into Kindling. Since we have Shield Bash and it has a cooldown, it means that our next crit will have 20% base crit. Now this is very important. We grab a bunch of cooldown on boots, belt, both rings, and the helmet on the base implicit of the helmet. This is enough to bring our shield bash all the way down to 6 seconds, which is required to make the build feel good. So I would not play the build until you got all of those pieces. All of it's great. Now we take 5 points in a protective impact. This gives us a little bit of defense after we use our shield bash, and then 3 points in a perfect bulwark, which makes it so that we can block 3 extra times after we use it, which makes it much easier to tank hits when we're trying to, of course, land the combo. Then for Javelin here, it's your stereotypical setup with Battle Standard with the healing, as that helps a lot, as we're turning off the Holy Aura and we're turning off the Consecrated Ground, which would normally heal us. Instead, we're using, of course, Javelin, which is a little bit better, as it means we can heal this amount per second based on our healing effectiveness, and it's all of our sustain, as our Javelin's cooldown is very low, which means we can essentially spam it. And then, of course, over here, we grab Sacred Forge to make our next Judgment deal 60% more damage. Very nice. Now, normally, what I was doing was I was taking Javelin and I was swapping for Shield Rush. The problem with this in maps is you have no sustain because you're not leeching much, because you're not hitting much, you're not healing much. So I was required to use Javelin. Now, of course, as well, there is a dash inside Javelin, Surprise Initiative, but for some reason, it feels like absolute ass this patch, so I'm not using it. Next is your stereotypical Holy Aura setup. Since we are spamming it off cooldown, I make sure to grab True Strike, so we get 80% base, 80% crit chance, which is amazing for us, and then a bunch of Fire Pen, 20% Fire Pen. I'm grabbing Purification because poisons suck. And then, of course, reses so that we can cap our reses much easier. We then, of course, take Reversal. This is very important. This tree is very important, as Reversal needs to be around 6 seconds like the rest of our kit to be useful, because we're still using it for mana, as you could tell in the footage. This means that we cannot grab the ever so insanely overpowered node Time Lost Wisdom, which was nerfed and changed, but it's still strong, as Time Lost Vitality was nerfed, did not give us as much cooldown recovery speed, which means we had to grab other stuff like cooldown on all of that. But as you can tell, it is very nice that our Shield Bash and our Reversal both have the same cooldown, which means we can use them pretty much easily, so that we always have them up at the same time, which is very good. Now for passives, same usual passives, the normal stuff. Make sure to get the block, of course, all that other jazz. Make sure to get the block and Forge Guard. Grab 5 points in Abyssal Endurance so you get the Volatile Reversal, because that's very important for the build. Then for Paladin, it's your usual stereotypical attunement stacking fiesta. Now, we will eventually grab 7 more points into Sanctuary Guardian. I just am only level 90 because one of the biggest problems that this build has and has problems with is the fact that when you're in the Monolith of Fate, you're not killing much, so you're not gaining that much XP. So I'm only level 91, but I just killed T4 Jurla, so who gives a shit, right? So it's whatever. Now for itemization here, we have, you eventually want to have 2 of these with Critical Strike Multiplier. Also as well, we are not using Throne of Ambition. Why is that? Because the boss fights don't last long enough for Throne of Ambition to get to max stacks, so it is actually worthless, even though it would be cool to have 40% more damage. If we had a boss fight that lasted more than a minute with this build, then maybe, just maybe, we would need it. I also use healing effectiveness idols. You can either go with Fire Pen with melee attacks, which does work with your Judgment, or you can go for block effectiveness to make yourself tankier, because we are, in fact, a block build. Now, the crown piece of my build, Hands of Judgment, you do not need this. This is just, of course, me showing off that I landed a really good pair of Hands of Judgment. It's very nice having online server functionality with the server authority, as I finally get to showcase all of my broken garbage that I've made, so that, and I don't have to worry about people complaining about it being too unrealistic, as yes, me myself have farmed this and made this. So, woohoo! For a helmet, I just had here, instead of that increased mana, you want flat mana, then attunement, and then I grabbed some HP. You really want the augury helm. Even taking off the augury helm brings our cooldown of volatile reversal to 6.3 seconds, and our shield bash is 6.6 seconds. So having the augury helm, just one missing piece of cooldown recovery speed, means that you'll have a terrible time with your shield bash. So every single cooldown counts. Our amulet, we want flat mana and healing effectiveness. We mainly want flat mana, as of course we do more damage based on our mana. So this is a really good amulet to hit. And healing effectiveness as well makes our javelin heal us more, and also as well gives us more damage. So this is about like 9% more damage with Judgment with the healing effectiveness, which is great. Our body armor, instead of that increased Smelter's Wrath damage, we would want like something like mana flat. Otherwise, it's perfect. Eventually, you can go for a different body armor that has 50% crit as the implicit. That helps you reach the 300% crit chance, and that's currently what I'm missing and why I'm not critting all the time. Now, my shield here, I went for healing effectiveness, block, reduce damage taken, and extra health. You would probably, instead of that healing effectiveness, go for block effectiveness, but I wasn't able to. I also wasn't able to take the block effectiveness from Age of Winter because I was not able to farm it as much, as I was spending all of my time trying to upgrade my pathetic critical strike avoidance roll. My rings, same idea, crit chance, attunement, block, health, that's pretty good. Other ring, mana regen. You don't actually need mana regen with this build. I'd rather have crit. And then, of course, resistances. This could be much better, but I didn't have any other opal rings sitting around with attunement. For the belt, I had cleanse, fire damage, health, cooldown. This is perfect, other than the fact that increased health could be hybrid health. Other than that, this is a good belt. You do want to seal that cleanse ailment as T1. Go for fire damage. Then go for, of course, mana regen, as you do want just a tiny little bit, just to sustain your shield, just to sustain your judgment and all that, just to sustain your javelin, right? Just a little tidbit, but it's not a big deal. Then, of course, Hands of Judgment, like I said, mandatory for the build to function. Boots, just movement speed, attunement, cooldown. Eventually, you'd want HP on these, of course. And then I have a +4 Judgment relic with attunement on it, but all the other stats are garbage, but that doesn't matter. It's fine. Inscribed Tablet is a good base because it gives flat mana. Also, as well, Solarum Tablet, or whatever it's called. That's a very good base, as it gives 60% increased fire damage and 60% increased healing effectiveness. Now, like I said before, you do not need a +4. You only need a +2. +2 is perfect. If you get a +3, that's great, but you don't need it. And that's pretty much it for the character. If you have any questions, leave them down below or join my Discord, as I'll be able to help you more directly. With all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go, probably pass out. Bye.